Welcome to Evolution Stories by Middle States. This interview series is devoted to teaching you how to lead change in education. We're here because facilitating change in schools has never been harder or more important. So this is your place to learn from those who are leading the way. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Christian Talbot. I am the president of the Middle States Association, and I am thrilled to be joined today by our guest, Dan Pink. Dan is a best-selling author. That's an understatement. His latest book is The Power of Regret, but he's also the author of books such as Drive and When, A Whole New Mind, To Sell is Human. He has a robust LinkedIn presence where he shares concise and actionable insights on motivation, on human skills, and how we navigate change and uncertainty. His TED Talk on the puzzle of motivation is one of the 25 most popular TED Talks of all time. And it's hard to limit Dan's biography, so we'll run out of time if I keep going. And instead, I'll just say, Dan, thanks, and welcome to Evolution Stories.
Thanks for having me, Christian.
So this is a podcast that's all about how leaders create change in their organizations. And I think of the work that you've done in your career as kind of diagnosing and teasing out the details of like why change happens and how change happens and even when change happens. But I want to start with the why. And I brought a copy of Drive with me because this book hit me like a Mack truck when I read it for the first time. I was still a full-time classroom teacher. And I remember reading the research that you were citing in the book about mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And I thought, oh my God, how did I never learn this before? It was really stunning. And even today, which is many, many years later, I'm still amazed at how few people understand the research basis for this book. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about, how did you come upon it and why did it feel so important to share?
Well, I actually came upon the research first. I had written another book, and I always love to get questions from readers, that previous book talked about how the set of skills that were becoming most important were changing from the logical, linear sorts of skills to the more artistic, empathic, conceptual kinds of skills. And many readers said, okay, that's cool. Maybe you're right. How do I motivate people to do that? And I had no idea. And I started looking at the research and motivation, and I had the same reaction that you did, Christian, which is like, whoa, how do we not know this? Like, this is kind of amazing that a set of motivators that we rely on in basically every organization in not only American life, but world life, has its limits. It's good for some stuff. It's less good for other things. And so I just found it so shocking and so fascinating that I had to write about it.
I wonder if you had the same reaction when you encountered that research for the first time that I had, which is seeing yourself in the research, sort of like, yes, of course, that's why I want to pursue mastery of something. Of course, that's why agency and autonomy are so important to me.
I think that's a really important insight, that one of the reasons that this research, I think, has begun to come out of the woodwork and to take hold a little bit is that it does make intuitive sense to people, that people can see themselves in this research. And the research, just to be very clear, to summarize 60 years in a sentence or two, is that there's a certain kind of motivator we use in schools and in offices and factories. Psychologists call it a controlling contingent motivator. I call it an if-then reward. If you do this, then you get that. If-then rewards are very effective for simple tasks with short time horizons. They're far less effective for complex tasks with longer time horizons. Not even a close call in the science. And I think that when we hear that, and then we look at our own lived experience, we have the same reaction that you did, which is, yeah, I want to be properly rewarded in the office, in a job, but I also want to have some sovereignty over what I do and how I do it. I want to get better at something that matters and make progress every day. I want to know why I'm doing something, not only how to do it.
So why do so many organizational leaders, wherever they are in the org chart, they may be the CEO or they may be somewhere as a middle leader, why do so many of us fail to recognize that once we're moved into that role of managing others and leading others, that we're defaulting to the same exact if-then rules that don't really work over longer time horizons?
Well, I think it's a few things. There are a lot of reasons. Number one is that we tend to mirror what the system in which we came up. So that makes one sense. If we were all raised in a world of if-then rewards, then we think that somehow that is either natural or that is just or that is productive. And so we just don't challenge that basic premise. I think that's one reason. A second reason, these get more and more insidious as I go along. The second reason is that we don't do what you just did in one of your earlier questions, which is extrapolate from our own experience. There are too many leaders who say, well, of course, I don't like being controlled. I want to have autonomy. Of course, I want to make progress on something that matters. Of course, I want to know the purpose of what I'm doing. But these people over here, they're not like that. So it's fairly insidious. And I think the other thing is even more insidious is that these if-then rewards are easy. They're really easy. You know, if I'm a leader of anything, if I'm a leader of a sports team, or I'm a leader of a school, or I'm a leader of a project team in a company, it's hard to figure out, okay, so what's the right level of autonomy for Maria? What's the right level of autonomy for John? How can I help Fred see the progress that he's making? How can I help this whole team understand why they're doing it? That's hard. It's much easier to say, hey guys, here's a reward, come and get it.
And when you say hard, Dan, I'm wondering if I'm hearing you correctly. Like, I hear that as almost like it's just cognitively less taxing to have to think through the challenges of.
It's less taxing. It's less taxing not only cognitively, it's less taxing on your time, because it isn't a universal solution. It isn't, I mean, I hate the cliche, it isn't a one-size-fits-all garment for everybody.
Yeah.
You have to calibrate it for the person. You have to calibrate it for different people. You have to calibrate it for different people at different times. You have to calibrate it for different people at different times in different roles. It's challenging.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you a question in a moment about your perspective on that in schools, especially given that, you know, we're filming this at Washington International School and you used to be on the board here and you sent your kids here. But first, I want to just share briefly about my own very naive experience in my first head of school role when I encountered resistance to a pretty massive change project.
Okay.
And I thought, oh no, these teachers, they don't want to change because they don't actually want to do the hard work. And they don't like what I'm asking them to do because it's going to make their lives harder. But I had assigned a moral valence to that. It never occurred to me that it's like less cognitively demanding on them, and there's no moral valence to that at all. It's just sort of like there may be moral consequences to that, but the decision itself to want to manage a classroom a certain way actually makes very good sense from a brain science standpoint.
I think that's right. There are other reasons. I mean, one big resistance to change is there are a lot of reasons that people resist change. One, when it's in their own midst, is that they don't know how to do it. Okay, it calls into question their competence, and people generally don't like to be shown incompetent. They don't like to be shown that they can't do something, and so there's a great deal of uncertainty about your own capability, and that's always a threat to people. Another reason is, and this is, I think, true in schools, more true in private firms, is that when there is change, people's assumption, their default, is that they will be worse off in the change.
Really?
Yeah. And because they don't trust the people who are leading. And so you have to overcome that default that they are going to be worse off. Another factor is that many times these change initiatives in schools or in companies or in any kind of institution are profoundly top-down and often hatched in secret and imposed top-down. And so there is not much in the way of co-creation. There's not much in the way of involving them in the process. And that creates a barrier too.
Yeah, and I assume that if change plans are concocted in secret, it makes those who have to go along with the change trust those change leaders even less, which then feeds the...
This is the argument for greater transparency in organizations, because when there isn't transparency, it's not as if people say, oh, I can't see what's behind the curtain, I don't care. What happens inevitably is that they say, oh, there's a curtain up, I can't see past it, the leaders are huddling behind there must be something really dark and nefarious going on there. When in fact, 99 times out of 100, it's what's beyond that curtain are imperfect people making tough decisions with no clear solutions, with imperfect information, trying their best.
Yeah.
And so it's just open the curtain. And so again, the barriers to change are there are multiple ones, but some of them is basically the I mean, you're sort of putting in terms of like a cognitive load.
Yeah. There's so many things I want to say in response to that, but first a clarifying question. When you say that people expect to be worse off in a change, is that, are they worried that they're going to be worse off, or are they convinced that they're going to be worse off?
I'm not sure. I think we can think of it in terms of default settings.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot true. I think that's true of a lot of behavior, that we operate very much based on default, in part because having defaults is energy efficient.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think the default is that that it's probably not, since they weren't part of it, since it's being done to them, since they're often murky on the why, it's probably not a good deal.
Yeah.
Now, what you will get sometimes, though, is again, that's not uniform. What you will get sometimes is some people who are absolutely opposed, some people who are totally on board, usually a small group, and then a very large number of people in the middle. And there is some evidence that it doesn't. I can't think of the name of the researcher. It's a guy at Wharton who's done some research on what portion of people do you need to have bought in order for things to tip, and it's smaller than you think.
Yeah,
something like 25%.
Right. Yeah, there's like an epidemiology almost.
Yeah. So you don't have to get everybody.
Right.
But if you can get that 25%, you have a fighting chance.
Yeah, totally. When you were talking about the curtain, I was again thinking with some chagrin about my own failures in trying to lead change, and I still run into this problem even today of under communicating. That there was a point early in my career where I didn't communicate at all, and it just like launched the change, and surprise, that didn't go so well as you can imagine. But even after I learned that lesson and tried to be as transparent as possible, I learned this kind of follow-up lesson, which is, a change project for a school leader in particular lives in their head all day long.
Yeah.
And they talk about it probably an order or two of magnitudes more than anybody else in the organization. And so when I share something, for example, with our staff or our commissioners or our member schools, that might be one time they're hearing it out of like a million things they're hearing. It's a drop in the ocean for them. Whereas for me, it's something I'm living with all the time. And so that feels like it's an important part of being transparent is like you almost can't over communicate. And whenever anybody feels like there's a blank to fill in, the default setting is likely to be fill it in with kind of the worst possible interpretation of things.
There are very few leaders of any institution, public or private, who are guilty of the sin of over-communication.
Yeah.
And I think you'd have a very astute analysis of why. I mean, we can learn a little social science here. I mean, what you're talking about in many ways is something called the curse of knowledge, where something exists in your head, and you think because it exists in your head, it's going to exist in other people's heads. So the famous experiments on this are where you ask people to tap out a song, okay, no melody, but just sort of tap out a song. And they're convinced that everyone will be able to identify it immediately, and no one ever can, because the song's playing in their head, but it's not playing in anyone else's head. So that's a good metaphor for that. So the song is playing in your head as a leader all the time, as you're saying. It's like the theme music of everything you're doing, but the radio isn't even turned on with this group. So, and then there's also another lesson that we see, multiple lessons actually. There's a concept in linguistics called processing fluency, where there are certain things that increase the ability of a message to go down, and one of them is repetition. Mm-hmm. And then there's also something a little bit more insidious, called the mere exposure effect, which is that when people are exposed to an idea, they believe it, whether it's right or wrong. But so all of which is to say, if you feel like you're over communicating, you're probably just beginning to do it right.
Right. My friend Adam Bryant, who created the Corner Office series, he says that if you're a leader and you feel like you're repeating yourself, he says you probably haven't started repeating yourself enough until people finish your sentences or they roll their eyes because they know what you're about to say. He's like, that's the point at which you've said just enough.
I think that's right. This is a lesson that I learned in I mean, when I early in my life, my working life, I worked in politics, and so I was a speechwriter. I worked on some campaigns, and being a politician is a tough job, especially since I was in the communication side of it, and I would always have to tell the people I was working for, okay, they would say, I don't want to say that again. It's like, well, you've said it many times, they haven't heard it. And the line I always used was when someone says to you, if I hear that guy or that woman say that one more time, I'm going to scream. If you get that reaction, right, then we're good.
Yeah.
But until you get that reaction, we're not good.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've talked about motivation as laid out in Drive, the purpose dimension of that work, and again, coming back to maybe what you've seen being on the board of a school or being involved in your own children's educations, what are some things that school leaders can do to kind of dial up a teacher's or a staff member's sense of purpose in the work? Like, assume that they've bought into the change and they're good with that part of it. I'm willing to do this, but the sense of purpose in it. Yeah.
So I'm glad that you've already have a copy of the book and that you paid for it, because I feel like I didn't get the chapter on purpose quite right. I think I left some capacity on the table. In that chapter, I talk about purpose as a very exalted thing. So we're solving the climate crisis, or we're improving the education of people, into the future, or we're building homes for the homeless, and there's clear that that's a motivator for people. There's no question about that. It's hard sometimes to get every single day. And so there's another kind of purpose, a quieter, you can think of it as capital P purpose and small p purpose. There's a small p purpose that I miss, which is simply helping out a colleague, getting a project out the door. In a school, maybe it's helping one kid master one tough problem that one day. Mm-hmm. It isn't about this capital P purpose. It's about that particular, and so all of that is important. How do you do it? In your over communicating as a school leader, it is one of the areas where you can, I don't even think you can over communicate because people don't do this, but begin communicating, is dialing up the conversations about why and dialing down the conversations about how, so that people, and we have a lot of evidence of this. There's a really fascinating study out of Harvard Business School where the researchers went to a cafeteria, just a regular run-of-the-mill cafeteria, and they rigged up iPads that allowed the cooks to see the customers. And the cooks were all back of the house, and when the cooks could see the customers, there were no pay, there was no exhortation, but when simply letting the cooks see the customers had the effect of the customer evaluation of the quality of the food improving.
Really?
Even if the customers couldn't see the cooks. Okay? Why? Because they're like someone who's back of house, who's just doing this, fairly routine thing. I'm making a cheese omelet, I'm making a grilled cheese, I'm making a hamburger, I'm making lentil soup, and just putting it out. But when they see, hey, that dude over there is eating the lentil soup, their lentil soup game goes up 10%.
Yeah.
Because, and that's not, they're not feeding the hungry, they're just doing their job. They're seeing the effect of their job. So the more you can have conversations about why, that is extraordinarily important. And in one of the things we did on the board here, we did it irregularly, but I thought it was effective, is that we would often start board meetings with a slide showing the mission of the school. Mm-hmm. And I like that. I like that kind of thing. I also like, when it comes to, I'm not a huge fan of mission, vision, and values, largely because it ends up being done by committee, largely because it ends up being gobbledygook in many cases. But I'm a big fan of simple language that people can repeat. Simple, concrete language is really effective. And one of the things that leaders can do is they can listen for that out in the world, out in their midst. How are people talking about it? How are people talking about the purpose and the why? And amplifying that.
Yeah. You know, what's funny about the Harvard Business Review research on the chefs, there's parallel research for math word problems, that when kids are doing math word problems and they replace the generic names in the problem with the names of their friends
Wow.
or family,
Wow.
people that they recognize, they're able to put a different frame around the problem and understand it actually in ways that they otherwise
love
wouldn't.
that.
Yeah,
That's
so it makes total
fantastic.
sense. Yeah. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the why of creating change, or at least motivating change. And you have a book that's literally called When. So let's talk about the when of change. And I think, Dan, where I want to start is this reality in schools, which I would say boils down to there's never a good time.
No.
There's never a good time to do this. There's never a good time to do that. If it's the start of the school year, you think everybody's fresh, but it's like, you know what? We just had to give up summer vacation. It's not a good time to do whatever it is you want to do. So with that as a caveat, and with another caveat, which is there's been some pretty substantial research done on mood among teachers and students over the course of a school year. And it's, I'm exaggerating only a little bit. It's pretty much a straight down line from start of the school year to the end of the school year. There's a slight plateau around winter break and another slight plateau around spring break, but otherwise the whole trend line is down. So with realities like that, how can school leaders think about the when of trying to create change?
Well, this is really complicated because I've also written about, at a smaller level, the school day itself and how the school day just simply starts too early for teenagers. There's no question about that. It's not a close call. Yeah. And yet, when I talked to school superintendents when I was working on this book several years ago, they just would roll their eyes, shake their head, and say, "Do not. If I mess with bus schedules, it becomes a living hell for me. You don't understand. It's like the third rail, or bus schedules, and secondarily sports practices.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'll put a very fine point on it on one dimension of that, on the scheduling thing, is a lot of what we do in schools, partly through inertia, is for the convenience of adults rather than the education of children. Mm-hmm. Scheduling of the school day, scheduling of the school year. It's very convenient for adults. It's less good for children. And so we just have to I think that's true for certain kinds of testing. It's convenient for adults. It's less good for children. And so we just have to decide what's going to be our animating principle in design. Is it going to be adult convenience or kid education? And we have that choice. On the way that our mood ebbs, and it's sort of a fractal of what happens over the course of a day, where our mood typically is up in the morning, early in the day, declines in the mid-afternoon, but actually recovers in some ways later in the day. What this means is that we have to be intentional where we can, recognizing the limited resources of putting certain kinds of academic subjects early in the day when kids, especially little kids, are more alert. And recognizing that the research tells us that all times of day are not created equal, that there are material differences in our cognitive performance based on time of day. It matters a lot. It matters more than we think. It explains performance. There's a well-known Danish study that showed that kids who took standardized tests in the afternoon scored as if they'd missed 2 weeks of school.
Wow.
And the kids are randomly assigned. It was a natural experiment because the schools do the standardized tests on computers, and there are more kids than computers, so they randomly assign kids to take the test at certain times of the day. The ones in the afternoon end up underperforming. Now, all of this points to a at least a modest solution. You and I are both drawing charts with our hands. So you drew a chart that went like this. This is actually quite telling. You start the school strong, right? Goes down. We have a winter break. Actually, it recovers a little bit, but it plateaus. We have a spring break. Oh, it recovers a little bit. That we need to be very intentional about breaks at every level of breaks. We have to start thinking of breaks as part of our performance, not a deviation from our performance. We have to start thinking about breaks the way that elite athletes think about breaks. Elite athletes do not think about breaks or sleep or rest or recovery as a sign of weakness. They think it as part of being an elite athlete.
Right.
And the rest of us don't think that way. And this is something where I'm convinced that leaders can play a big role, that leaders can model this behavior themselves.
So can I rephrase what
Yeah.
you just said just more bluntly?
Yeah.
It sounds like what you're saying is it is not possible to be an elite learner
Yeah.
if you don't take breaks.
100%. I mean, I think we're recognizing some of that by putting a greater importance on sleep. I actually think that if you think about the trajectory of how this is a very American view, but how Americans think about sleep today versus how Americans thought about sleep, even in my working lifetime, and certainly when I was in college, there was a kind of badge of honor if you were sleep deprived.
Yeah.
And now I think we know that's ridiculous.
Right.
And I think that breaks are following that same trajectory, where now people are intentional about it. You have people wearing Oura rings and measuring their sleep. My watch measures my sleep,
Yeah.
okay? And there are plenty of people who do that because they're like, well, wait, sleep is an important part of my life. I think breaks are following in that trajectory. And so we have to be intentional about breaks. And let's go back to the Danish study. The remedy that they used was that for the afternoon test takers, they said to the kids, it's going to be it's an amazingly complicated intervention. They said to the afternoon test takers, have a snack and run around on the playground for 20 minutes before you take the test. Scores went back up. And so we have a lot of research about the importance of breaks. They don't have to be massive. And we have a set of design principles about what is an effective break for adults, but for everybody. We know that the principles are very easy to announce. We know that something is better than nothing. So a short break is better than no break at all. We know that if you have a classroom and where kids are doing like kind of heads down work, if you say to them every 20 minutes, look at something 20 feet away for 20 seconds, that restores a lot of their focus and attention. Something is better than nothing. We know that moving is better than stationary, triply so for little kids. We know that outside is better than inside. There is, again, talk about going back to our earlier part of the conversation, a body of research that is inexorable and largely ignored. It's the benefits of being in nature and outside, even in small ways. So we know something's better than nothing. Moving is better than stationary. Outside's better than inside. It turns out that we have a lot of research showing that social is better than solo, that breaks with other people are more restorative than breaks on your own. And then we know that breaks where you're fully detached are better than breaks when you're not detached. And so if you think about those principles, you're describing recess. I mean, truly, it's like whoever came up, I don't even know the history of recess, but whoever came up with the idea of recess was responding to instincts about the human condition that are now validated in the science.
Yeah.
And so we should be intentional about those kinds of things for students, but also for teachers. One of the things that is amazing to me as a non-educator, as a civilian, is that teachers don't get any breaks.
Yeah.
They are like scheming to figure out when they can go to the bathroom, let alone having time to reflect and restore their attention.
Yeah. You know, there's this idea, and I subscribe to it, that schools should have, as part of the full-time staff, floating substitutes that they could just provide relief at any given moment because of exactly what you just said. But unfortunately, that's perceived as an expense rather than an investment that would provide a positive return that might be a little harder to measure, but that would have probably very significant influence on not only the teacher's well-being, but the student's learning too.
I think it would have, it's a testable proposition. My hypothesis would be that it would improve teacher retention, it would improve the quality of teachers whom you attract, and it would improve student learning.
Yeah, yeah. You said something earlier, though, that I want to come back to around the badge of honor and sleep deprivation. And I think maybe this is like a bit of an analogy, but I think there is for the especially the head of school, but really any school leader, if not a badge of honor, at least an expectation that I am going to be on all the time. And I'm wondering about what might feel, at least psychologically, like an irreducible challenge for that school leader to be public about taking breaks. That might feel like an untenable proposition, or at the very least, it might feel like a scary thing to kind of publicly say, like, I'm going to take a break. And I'm wondering if you have any advice for school leaders about how to do that, because it's obvious it's so important.
If there are mechanisms in place to allow teachers to take breaks, then I think it's a great idea. If the leader is the only one who gets the breaks, I'm less certain about that. If the students aren't getting breaks, I'm less certain about that. But if the leader is essentially striking the keynote, saying, hey, this is part of our performance, and everyone's going to take a break.
Yeah.
And I'm going to model that behavior. What sometimes you have the reverse problem inside of organizations, where not school organizations, but business organizations, where a leader will profess the importance of breaks and recovery, but then never take a break him or herself. And therefore the people looking up are like, okay, they're saying one thing and doing something else. I think I know the rules around here.
Yeah. Okay, well, we talked about why, we've talked about when, and I want to talk a little bit about how. And I would say, I've loved all of your books.
Hey, thanks.
And I mean that sincerely, but I think the one that most struck me besides Drive is To Sell is Human. And again, I was a full-time classroom teacher when I read it, and I remember thinking, oh yeah, like my job is to sell my students on why they should be learning this stuff and how important it is to them. And you've made the case more recently that, as you were saying at the beginning of our conversation, that there are these other skills, empathy skills, human skills really, creative thinking, design thinking even, that are essential to navigating a future, especially one with increasingly abundant AI as part of it. And I think the question, Dan, I have starts with the fact that educators naturally recoil from the word selling.
Sure.
And I'm probably...
They're not alone.
Yeah, a lot of people do, right? And when I think about the job of a typical head of school, it involves fundraising, and a lot of heads do not like to do fundraising because they don't want to sell. Right. But it's essential for the work. How can we help teachers to think about the work they're doing as selling? How can we help heads think about the work they're doing as selling, not as something to recoil from, but as something that actually helps them achieve their purpose even more powerfully?
Yeah, if people recoil from the word selling, then part of my best advice is don't use that word. What I tried to do in that book is recapture that word, because I think all of us are selling all the time, and that selling is in its own way noble. What you're trying to do is you're trying to promote an exchange that leaves both sides better off. That's what teachers are doing. But think of it just as, what you're trying to do is you're trying to move other people. You're trying to influence other people. And if those verbs land better, go for it.
Yeah. I think the thing you just said is really striking. The goal here is to leave both sides better off. It's not, I'm trying to sell you on something so I can get something from you.
It's not zero. This is an important life lesson. Most interactions are not zero sum. Some are, most are not, and most interactions are positive sum. Yeah. And one of the best ways to make me better off, metaphorically, I don't mean economically, but just sort of broadly and metaphorically, is to help you become better off. It's positive sum.
Yeah.
Now there are some things that are. I actually think this is one of like the most. I actually told this to my kids about like understanding the difference between what is positive sum and what is zero sum, because there are some things that are zero sum, and you have to be smart and savvy as a human being in knowing when you're in a zero sum situation. Example: overhead space on an airplane. That's a zero sum game. Okay, if one person gets it, another person does not. But most interactions are not that. So, but I wouldn't obsess with that. I would think about what teachers want to do is they want to influence, they want to guide, they want to move. And I think the idea of moving other people is powerful, because that's what teachers are. That's what teachers are doing.
Yeah. When it comes to the fundraising part of a head's job, I very much think of that as positive sum, because presumably you're talking to someone who has the capacity to make a gift, and they're going to give a gift somewhere to something that they care about. And you're helping them to connect with something that could be very important and powerful for them.
Sure, and you're also having done some fundraising myself, what you're also trying to do is find the purpose and the meaning and the significance of that, so that your gift, again, I'm hesitant to assign actual values to it. So if you give X dollars, the hedonic value of that is going to be greater than X. I don't necessarily buy that kind of calculus, but there's plenty of evidence that that one of the things that give people the most satisfaction is giving and helping others.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's really important there is that it not be framed as an exchange, and there is a zero sumness. It's going out of one pocket into another pocket in the dollar amount, but in the actual transaction, what you're doing is you're part of the legacy of this institution. You are building it for the future. That's not going to work with everybody, and actually the levels of charitable giving among especially upper middle class people in this country are kind of appalling. Yeah. They're appallingly low. Yeah. And I think it is a worthy endeavor. Yeah.
Your most recent book, which is about the power of regret, is really powerful.
Thanks.
Especially emotionally, and it's, at least based on the title, counterintuitive.
Yes.
That regret can be perhaps the most powerful teacher that we have in our lives.
I think it can be, yes.
Yeah.
If we treat it right.
Yeah, so unpack that idea.
Well, so here's what we know. So we have, once again, built on the evidence, there's a lot of research on regret. It's in multiple fields. It's in cognitive science. It's in social psychology. It's actually, the early research in regret was in economics and even game theory. But what we know from the kind of almost the biological and psychological science of it is, number one, is that everybody has regrets. It's one of the most common emotions human beings have. But it's also one of the most productive emotions that human beings have if we treat it right. And the problem, and here as an American, I'm going to lay the blame fully on the US of A. America has inculcated people with the belief that the way to lead a good life is to be positive all the time and never be negative, to always look forward and never look back. And that is not the right recipe. That is scientifically wrong. What we should be is positive most of the time, but negative emotions are instructive. We should be in the present and look forward a lot, but looking to the past helps us out. This is why we have history classes, right? So what we need to do is essentially a form of triangulation. That in America, we've been taught to ignore our regrets, to say, put our fingers in our ears, say, no regrets, I don't have any regrets, I'm always positive, I never look backward. Bad idea. Other people end up wallowing in their regrets, ruminating on their regrets. That's a bad idea too. What we should be doing is confronting our regrets, staring them in the eye, using them as signal, using them as data. And when we do that, it is a powerfully productive and helpful emotion, especially for leaders.
Yeah. I wonder if you have any thoughts about a practice here.
Sure.
Because school leaders make 1 million decisions a day.
Yeah. And
over the course of a school year, that compounds. And let's assume that they have the time to do the reflective work that you're talking about. Is there something simple?
Sure, there is.
Yeah.
Give me a regret that a school leader might have.
Well, I tried to make that change happen, and I didn't consult enough people.
Okay, fantastic. Fantastic. That's a great regret. So you have this regret. So let's talk about what the regret is. The regret is a feeling. It's an emotion. It makes you feel bad. Okay. Once again, you can say, okay, you know what? Ignore it. I ignore the negativity. I want to be positive. I'm going to think positive. Bad idea. Or you can say, oh my God, I'm the worst person in the world. I'm such an idiot. That's a bad idea too. Here's the process. Inward, outward, forward. The first thing is inward. How do you treat yourself internally? My hunch is that a lot of high-performing school leaders, if we were to broadcast their self-talk, we would be shocked because it's lacerating. It is vicious. You idiot, what is wrong with you? They're second-guessing themselves and being very cruel to themselves. There's research from Kristen Neff at University of Texas who pioneered the idea of self-compassion. What it says, in short, is don't do that. Okay? It's not effective. That lacerating self-criticism is not effective. Patting yourself on the back, that's not very effective either. What's effective is treating yourself with kindness rather than contempt. So an easy thing would be if one of your staff came to you with this thing, would you say, "You idiot, what's wrong with you?" You treat them with, so don't treat yourself better than anybody else, but don't treat yourself worse than anybody else. Recognize that everybody has regrets. It's part of the human experience, and it doesn't define you. This moment alone doesn't define you. So that's inward. Outward. There's a strong argument to be made for writing about your regret or talking about your regret, maybe talking about it with a collection of peers. One of the things that we know about writing, especially, but even talking, is that it takes this amorphous, blobby thing and makes it concrete. That helps in sense making. It helps getting it off your shoulders. And the second thing, so you can say, I didn't consult enough people. All right. Are you the first school leader? So the inward is, are you the first school leader ever to not consult with people? Probably not. If someone came to you and said, I didn't consult with enough people, would you lacerate them? No. You would say, okay, you can do better next time. So talking about it, so forgiving yourself, not really forgiving yourself, but treating yourself with kindness, writing about it and talking about it, and then actually being very explicit. What's the lesson I learned from this? The lesson in there is very easy. I need to consult with more people. So think hard. The next time you have a project, what's the next project in which you should consult people? And do that. And so when you treat yourself with kindness, write about it or talk about it, draw a lesson from it and apply it to the next step, it's incredibly transformative. We have a lot of evidence of this. It can help make people better negotiators. It can help make people better problem solvers. It can help make people better strategists. I mean, problem solving, negotiation, strategy, that's what school leaders do.
Yeah. I'm thinking that one of the reasons, maybe not the only and maybe not the number one reason, but one of the reasons why this doesn't happen often enough is that we are, as human beings, incredibly well defended against our mistakes. And we don't really want, typically, to be honest with ourselves about our mistakes. Right. And so there's this initial step before the inward, or maybe at the start of the inward phase, where you have to be willing to look at the truth with clear eyes.
Yes.
And I'm wondering about that part of the process. My master's degree is in psychoanalysis. And I had to be in analysis for 5 years.
Oh my God.
So yeah, it was actually a tremendous experience because what it trained me to do was to lie on the couch and say whatever came into my head, even though I didn't really want to be honest about that stuff all the time.
Yeah. And
when I became a school leader, I just said to myself, you know what? You're not going to get past this hurdle unless you're honest. But I had 5 years of practice at that. If you don't have practice at that, how do people take that initial step to be honest?
I think that the writing about it is a way to be honest with yourself, because people might perform honesty in their head, but when you write about what you regret and why you regret it, you're forced to confront it. And there's some great research. Writing about our negative emotions is incredible. Bang for the buck is a very powerful intervention, not only for regret, but for other kinds of things. Jamie Pennebaker at University of Texas has a huge amount of research on this, because what it does is, again, it takes something amorphous and makes it concrete, and it forces you to do the job that you learned in 5 years of psychoanalysis, which is basically to stare the truth in the eye.
Yeah.
But it's easier to stare the truth in the eye when it's sitting there in front of you. Or if you're in a safe space with, I don't want to say safe space, but when you're in a group setting with peers you respect, putting it out in the world and having other people join you in making sense of it is another way to confront that. But the smallest thing that I would have leaders do if they're concerned about that is write about your regret for 5 minutes a day for 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that you'll get better at looking that truth in the eye.
Yeah, sounds spot on. Okay, last question.
Yes.
AI.
I've heard of it.
Yep. In the next 10 years, we're probably going to see more, not less. And I'm wondering how the work that you've already done, particularly in A Whole New Mind, in thinking about the power of storytelling, the power of creativity, of having agency over your creativity and not just outsourcing it to an AI, for example. What are some of the simple things that you hope young people in schools today are doing with their time in education environments so that they can thrive in a world of increasingly abundant AI?
Well, I mean, it is going to call for a set of somewhat different skills. The most important thing that I would say as a writer is don't do your first drafts on large language models. Do your first drafts on your own. You can use large language models to get feedback, to get suggestions and things like that. But outsourcing the first draft is a terrible idea. It will really corrode your thinking.
Yeah.
We want to have cognitive difficulties are how we get stronger. So that's one thing that I would say to students. Beyond that, I would look to the horizon and think about what are the skills that are going to be really important. AI creates abundant right answers, which means that questions are more valuable. So being able to ask good questions, being sparked by curiosity. Taste becomes much more important. I say that I know this myself. If I do an email newsletter, and in an email newsletter I can put the draft of the email newsletter into a large language model and say, suggest 50 subject lines. And it'll give me 50 subject lines. But 48 of them are going to be pretty bad.
Right.
But I have to know what's bad and what's good. So taste is really important. The ability to iterate is going to be even more important. So, you try something and you try it again and you try it again and you try it again and you try it again, and constantly refining and improving. So iteration is going to be really important. For leaders of all kinds, I actually think that allocation is going to be important, that you're going to have to figure out how to allocate resources. What does the AI do and what do your human people do? And I think that's going to be really important for educators, that kind of allocation. For students, I think that the skill of composition in the way that musicians compose and the way that visual artists compose a painting. AI is very good at the pieces, but the human being has to put the pieces together, has to arrange it into a composition. So compositional skills are going to be more important. And I also think that integrity is going to be really important, because these AI, they have no moral compass. And left to their own devices, they could do some pretty crazy stuff. And so it's up to us to have the integrity and the wisdom to provide that moral compass.
Well said. This is a great place to end. Thank you so much for this, Dan.
A pleasure.